Hello, my name is Bill Deane, and I've been an assignment editor and a journalist for a number of years. And I've taken voluntary retirement to write this story. This is an important story that very few people know in the United States, and they should know because their lives can depend on it. It's called Smooth Criminal. Countless Americans are being hurt, some killed by a secret prisoner release program. The feds don't want to do certain dangerous assignments, I can't blame them, so they free prisoners. Smart, confident criminals are great substitutes for them, as they can't stand being in jail and will risk anything for their freedom. I can bring you innocent civilians who have lost their homes, businesses, and bank accounts because these criminals are on the loose between their dangerous assignments. Then if caught or killed in a foreign country, there's no connection to the CIA, DIA, or whatever. I took voluntary retirement, as I say, from CBS News to research and write this unbelievable story, and it's something that everybody should know for their own protection. I feel that it's my duty, since there's no other journalist who has seen this and developed this story, which I learned firsthand. The government should reimburse these victims because the feds knew so well that some of those criminals were posing as federal agents and to get money and property from patriotic Americans who were then conned into believing that they were doing something good for their country. People are hurt because the feds did not supervise the freed criminals between their dangerous assignments. I disagree that this would blow the feds' cover, and that's the excuse for not trying to protect the people. By accident, I happen to know one of the illegally released criminals. I was told that I was followed for 3 weeks when I was a young disc jockey at that time, fearing that I'd go to the Miami Herald with a story. The conclusion was I was just a crazy DJ, which I was at that time, and not that interested in telling any news story. I'd like to tell you a few stories about what has happened. I just happened to run into this story because, as I say, I was a disc jockey at the time, and a guy came to my station. I was told by the music director that it would be a good idea to play his records. He showed up with a couple of other guys, and they were very polite. I don't know who the music director saw or knew, but I got the idea that it was some kind of a mafioso connection and that it would be a nice idea to play the kid's record. The kid, it turns out, went to the mob, and the mob gladly put his record out and distributed it among the radio stations. In return, the favor was supposed to be to extort a high political official in Miami. Well, the kid did that, but the high political official had told the police, and when the transfer of money was to take place at the Coral Gables bus station, there must have been 20 plainclothes cops who arrested him. He was then thrown in jail. In jail, he was given an IQ test by the federals, the police, the CIA, we don't know if it was exactly the CIA. He told me later, how do I know? He says they didn't wear it printed on their back the way the FBI does. They never mentioned the word CIA, but there's every evidence that since this involved Cuba, and the CIA, we know, it's been documented, has run the Cuban invasion, the Bay of Pigs, and so forth, that turned into a disaster. I didn't know anything about him after that, after he pushed the record, and I had no idea that he was out of jail. I had no idea that he was a criminal and had been convicted and put in jail. But then 6 months later, I was working at another radio station, and I was getting involved in covering news at that particular time, and I developed into what I consider an honest journalist and a hard-working journalist over the years. But I had no idea when this bulletin came across the wire from Associated Press and then United Press International that there was a kidnapping to Cuba, it was titled. And they listed the 3 guys that I knew that were coming to the radio station. That was 6 months before that. And these guys, I couldn't believe that these guys were going to Cuba to defect and become communists. They had no interest that I knew in anything but women on Miami Beach and drinking and having a lot of fun. And they came over to the station when I was working there as a DJ before, and they just were very polite, and they wanted me to play their record. I didn't play it that often because it wasn't that good. These guys, I couldn't believe, on the bulletins that were coming over the wire 6 months later, that they had anything at all to do with Cuba. It just didn't make sense. They were not the type. We never had one political conversation, and I talked to them a lot. So what were they doing down in Cuba, and why was Castro letting them go? Supposedly they had flown a small plane, a Cessna, from Tamiami Airport in Miami, and they went down there to defect, supposedly, and that Castro would not allow, and he was putting them back on a plane. That in itself was puzzling because he had never let any of these hijackers back into the United States, and here he was letting all 3 back. As it turned out, as the bulletin came in, there was a quick change. The name of the pilot who I knew was changed to somebody else, and the other 2 that were with him remained in those names. And that only happened after they supposedly were in Cuba for like 8 days. And Castro was letting them go. He was putting them on a Pan Am jet, and they arrived at Miami International Airport. Sitting there along with these guys was another pilot. The pilot had been changed. The guy that I knew who was the pilot had disappeared. He got on the plane in Havana, he disappeared when he got to Miami, and there was another guy who said I was their pilot, and they forced me at gunpoint to fly to Cuba. The story, of course, was false. They were working for the government, and the government itself could not reveal that we were going into another country in a spying mission, particularly a country that we had no relations with anymore. This was a very mysterious situation, and I couldn't figure out what was going on. It was totally puzzling to me. They were then immediately being charged with international kidnapping. There was a new law that came out, the Air Piracy Act, which called for the death of, from 20 years to death in the electric chair. And this was going to be a big trial. There were, like 3-inch headlines in the Miami Herald on this called "Kidnapping to Cuba." Of course, I just couldn't believe that they were involved in such a thing. It just didn't make any sense to me because I knew them. I knew what they were thinking, and they weren't thinking communism or political in any way. I left that story. I was afraid to see them in prison. I just didn't, I wasn't that much of a journalist. I didn't know how to handle the story. I told some other people about it. They didn't seem that interested because there were so many kidnappings so many hijackings to Cuba that it was just the routine. And I didn't think it was a routine because nobody had ever gone down there in a little Cessna. They were on DC-7s and DC-8s in those days. And this was just very unusual. I was one Sunday working over at Channel 10 in Miami, and I got a telephone call. And there it was, the smooth criminal. He says, "Can we have lunch?" And I was curious enough to, and young enough to say, okay. And he says, "I'll call you back." And he called me back, and he said, "You're going to meet me at this Cuban restaurant." And so I said, okay. He told me it was on Southwest 8th Avenue, and that's the Tamiami Trail over to the west coast of Florida. And so I got there and there was nobody. The Cubans don't eat at 1:30 in the afternoon on Sunday. Give them about 5 more hours. There was nobody in the restaurant of about 16 tables. It wasn't a very large place. In the corner was a guy from, looked very mysterious. I've seen that characterization in many a movie. It's somebody sitting at a table by himself checking things out. Well, this was real. A guy in the corner with a necktie on and suit, and he was looking at the two of us as we sat down, and then he folded the paper and stared at me for about a minute, and then got up and, without looking at us, walked out the door. And I said, "What is that all about?" And he said, "Oh, they have to know who I'm with at all times." Well, that kind of scared me. And then he said, "You know, you've been followed for 3 weeks." And I said, "Me? Followed for what?" He said, "They thought that you knew too much, and they decided not to eliminate you," his words, because you were just a crazy DJ at that time, and you wouldn't go to the papers with the story. When I went home a little while later, I was looking in the rear view mirror and kind of scared, I must say. During this little meeting with this smooth criminal, he told me, he said, I said, "What happened to the pilot?" He had absolutely nothing good to say about him. He said he chickened out and he wanted to get out of Cuba. And he says, they forced me at gunpoint to fly the plane to Cuba. I didn't want to come. Let me go back to the United States, he was saying. And so the respect for this guy who chickened out was down to 0. And that may be the reason why he disappeared between Havana and Miami that day, or 6 months earlier. He told me, the smooth criminal told me, that they were going to Cuba regularly, and that he had been in jail because of this extortion, this bus depot extortion that I told you about. And he was really confident that they had no trust at all in that pilot, and he just hated him for chickening out while they were under interrogation and under torture for 8 days in Cuba. And they finally went to the big, awful El Principe prison in Havana. You know, in the United States and New York, we have an Empire State Building that we look up to. People in Havana can look up to a prison as a good reminder of what might happen to them. He told me that they were spying, and that he, when he was in jail, as I say, was given an IQ test and so forth, and they picked him among a few others to get out of jail. And to get out of jail and do dangerous assignments, which he readily, with his confidence, took on. And he was living like a king. Nobody knew that he was out of jail except the feds, and it appears to be the CIA or DIA or one of those organizations like that. He was out of jail. In the meantime, the Justice Department had no idea that these guys were working for the United States government. One hand not knowing what the other hand is doing. So with great vigor, the Justice Department brings on a kidnapping trial of these 2 guys, and the pilot is the only witness, the pilot who wasn't the pilot. And he told, and very good, over dismissals and about 3.5 years of trials and dismissals and so forth, he testified that, yes, I was kidnapped and they forced me to fly to Cuba. That was the story that they stuck to, and it's the story that, of course, is not true. But it's pretty funny in a way that the left hand didn't know what the right hand is doing, and the Justice Department carried on with this unbelievable attempt to charge these guys with kidnapping. The judge apparently was in on it because this judge, Judge Emmett Choate, was more of a cheerleader to the trial than being a judge. He was very sympathetic toward the 2 guys, and he was coming up with the silliest excuses why they shouldn't be sentenced. One of them was, he says, wait, the new Air Piracy Act says a transport plane. He says, a Cessna is not a transport plane. Case dismissed, and it was. And these guys walked down the courthouse steps so cocky that they knew something that they couldn't say. They wanted to say it, and in the trial they were saying, we are patriots, we love America. And then the paper would come in and talk about how crazy these guys were because they were involved in a kidnapping, which you and I now know that they weren't involved in a kidnapping. So he dismissed that case, and then another one, he says, then they got permission to try again on another technicality. And then he says, wait a minute, you can't say that these guys are in a kidnapping because we never saw a gun. Even though the pilot says that there's a gun, nobody has showed us the gun, there's no evidence, case dismissed. In other words, you can go kidnap a baby at midnight tonight and steal the baby, and if you don't have a gun in your hand, it's perfectly all right, according to this judge. He was just trying to come up with one excuse after another. After 4 years, it went all the way to the United States Supreme Court, who, again, did not know that this thing was a ruse. The United States Supreme Court said, Judge Emmett Choate, you have to hold a real trial. Well, at this point, he had run out of excuses, and they held a real 12-person trial. And in a couple of hours, the jury came back and said that, yes, they're guilty as charged. Then the judge said, this is the worst case of justice since a middle-aged man stole a loaf of bread because he was starving and then had his hands cut off. He said, this is so terrible for these boys. He says, but I am forced by law to sentence them to 20 years in prison. That's the minimum, and I have to do that. Well, there was a little clause in there someplace along the line, and the little clause was, unless excused earlier by the warden. Well, these guys didn't even get to prison that day. They were walking free in a matter of hours because the warden, who they didn't even have to meet, supposedly had excused them earlier for being good citizens or something like that. This is a story that goes on with lots of money. One of them said that I was walking down Flagler Street in Miami, which is one of the main two streets, Miami Avenue being the other one. And he got bumped into, didn't think anything about it. And a couple of blocks later, he put his hand in his pocket, and there was $900 in $20 bills. He says, that's how I got paid that week. They were living like kings in between assignments, and money was just coming in cash. It was, they were enjoying themselves. They, when they had to go to court and so forth, they would wind up back in jail for a day or something like that, or if the prosecuting attorney wanted to see them, something like that, they would have to go back into prison. They also had a nice apartment for their girlfriends and so forth up above the jail. So life was pretty good. And then the money started drying up about 4 years after the incident. And then they started returning to a life of crime, and serious crime too, as it went. They started out doing 7-Eleven robberies and drugstore robberies, and pretty soon they started getting into heavy drugs. And one of them, the smooth criminal, wound up with a CIA Air Force called Air America that was dealing in drugs, as we now know, for a logical reason. They would only be able to get the volunteers from other countries in Southeast Asia to get, the only way they wanted to get paid was through drugs. American dollars didn't mean anything to them, so it was up to the CIA to pay them or they wouldn't fight. And they protected Thailand from the North Vietnamese very effectively. It was called in the Golden Triangle, as you probably know. After that, they came back. They weren't wanted that much with the government, and I'm not sure if they were wanted at all. at this time. So our smooth criminal started going into heavy drugs, and he went to a motel on in Miami, on Biscayne Boulevard, and met this woman who owned the motel. And he was a terrific con artist. He told the woman in a very nice motel, 80 units, a pool, and quite nice. I have pictures of it, and it looked very good in the mid '60s. He told her that he was a government agent and that she could do a lot for her country. She was a very patriotic person. Her family had come from Poland. She was born here, but they were truly patriotic Americans. And she really liked this guy called Smooth Criminal in a patriotic way. There was no sexual attraction or anything like that, but she wanted to do something for her country, and he told her that she could do a lot for her country if she only let him help her run the motel, and that a lot of government agents would be coming. Well, he became a great informant, and that's one of the reasons they kept him out of jail at this time. He had, in one particular case, he was running about 25 people doing an American Express con operation, and what a con artist he was. They were about to take him in because they knew they had found out about his scam, and he said, you know, how about this? If I give you 15 names of people that are involved in this, in other words, the people working for him, you can take in 15 people. You know how great you're going to be arresting 15 people and finding them guilty? Or you can take me in. And this is how he stayed out of jail. Another time the FBI came to the motel and said, we're going to take you in. We know you're dealing in drugs and so forth. He says, well, you can take me in, or you can get a whole load of cocaine going up to New York. I should be crossing into South Carolina now on I-95. Be crossing the line probably in 15 minutes. You can tell your boys up there. Well, this buddy who was delivering the drugs up to New York, he also had ammunition and guns in the car. He had just crossed the line, and the cops were ready for him, the feds, and there was quite a gunfire operation, and he died. I believe it was like a Bonnie and Clyde thing. His wife was with him. I think that she escaped. I'm not sure what happened to her after that. I lost track of that. This is one thing after another. Now, okay, what happened to those 15 people? Well, it was time for the con artist to tell us that it's time for a party, because they were getting out of jail. It wasn't that serious. They were in jail for maybe, a month or 2 months as punishment. And as they got out, he had a welcome home pool party. It was Christmas time in Miami. So he ordered 100 trees around the pool. He had a band. He had all kinds of money. The money, of course, was not his. It came from the woman, who was again told all the patriotic work that he was doing and they were doing, and that she could be a part of this. And and she believed it in many ways, because the FBI, with their emblazoned FBI in white letters on the back of their jackets, and she had no idea that they were about to bring the guy in all the time. She thought that they were talking, important investigative work, and that he was a part of it, as he tried to tell her. This went on. He had a con artist who eventually, a lawyer that was working with him, and he and the lawyer sold the motel from under her. She had property up in New Jersey, 3 pieces of property, and they were sold from under her. Her son up in Connecticut, who had a fine job with one of the major companies in America, was having marital problems. And so he had conned the mother, the woman running the motel, that they needed to go up there and he was going to take care of the marital problems for her son. As soon as he gets up there, he sets up a drug operation in this suburban house. And they would lock the son in he's like 30 years old at that time, would lock the son in a bedroom upstairs while they ran this very fast transaction of money and drugs downstairs. The chief of police was well aware of it, and when the son went to the chief of police and said, "Can you please help us get him out of our living, out of our suburban house, please help us." And of course the chief of police was well aware of the operation. He says, "You know, we got a 24-hour-a-day operation observing your house. And in that house, we know that something's going on, and we're going to make a raid very soon." And he says, please get them out of my house. You know, they're taking over my life. I can't even move around in my house. They locked me in my bedroom door." And at that time, the chief of police started to read him the Miranda rights. Now, you know what that means. It means that the chief of police thinks that he's part of this operation. He was a prisoner of the prisoners that were operating. And he said, "Boy, did I get out of that police station fast," because the next sign would be throwing him in jail. Crazy things like that happened. And he went, finally, after he'd sold everything out of Miami, he went over to Tampa and found the woman that was running the motel. She was staying with part of her family. She was working very hard in a nursing home and got enough money so she could start renting on her own. As soon as that happened, he wound up in her house again, and this was his operation. She went to the FBI in Tampa and said, "Please help me get this guy out of my house. He's on drugs, he's a criminal, please help us." And because he was being protected, the FBI said, "Go home. He's no con artist." The title of this could be "Nowhere to Turn." You know, this is happening, and where can you go? You go to the police for help, and they say, "Go home. He's no con artist." This guy was unbelievable. He drugged his wife one time. It looked like she was going to die, and the next time she did die. And it died in a motel that was near where they were living. And the woman then knew that there was a death, that his girlfriend had died, and I asked her. I said, "What was he like? How did he react?" And you know, he came back to your place. She says, "Oh, he just went to sleep." And here he had killed his wife with cocaine or whatever. A couple of police came by to investigate. He didn't. He just left the dead body at the motel. And the Tampa police came in, a couple of officers, and he pretends he has a terrible disease. And it's a contagious disease that if the cops get too close to him, they will get it, and that this is what really killed his wife, he's telling them, and he's got it now, and this is going to mean death for him very, very soon. The two Tampa police officers backed away, got in a car, and that was the end of their investigation. He was never arrested for this at all. There, also over in Tampa on the same street, he was getting drunk and bragging about how important he was for the United States government, and he had an AK-47, a few of them actually, and if you know what I mean, this AK-47 is pretty damn dangerous. They spit out bullets by the instant, and he would be firing it in the middle of the street and telling everybody how smart he was, and so a guy from a vet from Vietnam was special forces, and he knew that some kids could get killed while this guy is out there drinking and shooting off these guns and telling how important he is to everybody. So he called the police. The vet called the police, and the officer comes and says, "We are under strict orders not to reveal anything about this visit. I'm only here to ask him to hand in some of these weapons that he's got. That's all I can do." He says, "Because I am under orders from way, way above the chief of police of Tampa, way up above," and he didn't say what it was, "but to make no record of this visit to this place." So he was still being protected. Is he still being protected? He certainly is. The damage that he's done to people, I've tried to, through Freedom of Information Act, find out if he's dead or alive. I resorted to that. I wanted to know where he was. In the beginning, that they wouldn't reveal. And then I just simply, and this woman who's now 91 years old, totally broke, she says, "I'm penniless," she uses those words, is a victim of this. She hasn't been able to recover. Here she is, 91. Fortunately, she's healthy enough to make beds and to take care of a retired Air Force general. This is an unbelievable story, but it's very, very true. And she needs to be reimbursed, I think, because the government knew very well, full well, that this guy was posing as a federal agent, which is against the law, but because he was such a great informant that they wouldn't do anything, that they wouldn't put him in jail. There are so many cases, so many crazy cases of what this guy has done. Now, what should we do as American citizens for this awful situation? We know very well that other people are being conned by these criminals. They're criminals, and they're out and they're free. If you and I are narco detectives in a large city and we want to get into a drug operation and find out what's going on and make some arrests and so forth, we go to a judge and we say, "We've got a guy who's sentenced to 30 years in here for his drug operations, but he's now willing to help us, and maybe we can reduce his sentence to 10 years or something. He's going to go with us, and he's going to lead us into this." The judge, this is going before a court, and the judge makes that decision, and he says, "Okay, but you got to watch him 24 hours a day because he is a criminal, and he's going to be out there on the streets, and you have to protect the American citizens, the innocent people. He can't run amok on while this is going on." And the officers say, "We will have a 24-hour-a-day observance of this guy, and we guarantee you that nobody will be hurt while we're investigating and he's leading us into the middle of this drug operation." Nothing like that happened under Smooth Criminal. This guy was given total freedom. Why? Because the feds don't want to be involved or show what they're doing, and they're so afraid that their operation will be exposed. And I totally disagree. I think that if they can do all of this secret information and secret work around the world, that they can very well protect these people without being identified and without the operation being identified as part of theirs. I think that there should be 24-hour-a-day law enforcement supervision of these criminals who are on the loose. They may be doing good. They may be. The attitude, of course, is that a few people have to suffer because we got 315 million people in America, and this is going to benefit the majority of us, and only a few people have to suffer. That is not necessary in this particular case. Maybe it is in other cases, and I'm not arguing those. We've applied, as I say, through the FOIA to find out who he is, where he is, if he's dead or alive. She swears that he was trying to get into her car in a shopping center just a few months ago. And it's highly possible that he's still alive. If he's under the witness protection program, he cannot identify himself. She says that he came right up to her window in the shopping center And she was so scared that she ran right into the car ahead of her. Not that bad, but and at that point he ran away. And of course, as I say, under the witness protection program, you do not identify, you do not even see your relatives or anybody. You change your name, change your identity, location, and everything else. The feds have refused to protect the people. They're protecting the crooks, and they're not protecting the people as much as they're protecting the crooks. My name is Bill Deane, and this is my story, and I want the people to know to protect themselves. I feel obligated to do this. And I have a book out called Smooth Criminal, and you can learn a lot more about this unbelievable act.